What have you guys been doing with PowerShell the last couple of months? Whoever wants to start.
Yeah. So I built a couple of modules and putting together modules for some Quana, pulling data from licensing and various different like logon stuff, using PowerShell to push it to Flux, which installed on CentOS blocks.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's a couple modules that just do that. Dashboard, different things like logon counts, licenses like that. Yeah. What else?
Every little bit helps though. As you find time there, you'll change.
Yeah, I wrote a script to create SSD pairs.
Search and all that kind of stuff. That's one thing where automation helps you with mistakes. Well, maybe else we're talking about PowerShell. I was trying to think what all I've been doing. Actually, I spent today fighting with. We got this simple command to update our modules. Got some stuff published internally. So, we're in some scenario today where we call this like all kinds of throwing random errors in base gallery. Yes. Anyways, I was trying to fix it so it gracefully eat those errors. I felt like I was really fighting with PowerShell. I really love what the idea of what you do, but man, sometimes
the Git module.
Yeah, when I want to really dive into like today I had a line where it's saying like error actually ignore. Like I was cleaning up proper error handling. I slowly realized knowing it is that we have a list of modules. So right there, should I stop the list? So I'm expecting results to be processed somewhere else in error.
Yeah.
Count for some other way. Yeah, it's on there. Well, I thought I'll kick it off. Start talking about modules. Have you guys built any modules yet?
Yeah.
You've done a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually followed your tutorial, building it in Pisaki.
Oh, good.
The build up.
I know you did that one.
Tutorial.
No, I'll actually reference back to that when I kind of get to it. So, I guess modules. I think that's modules are really the ideal and the preferred way to like package your scripts and functions. Like, I know we can start with a single function or a single script. As you pass that around, it gets bigger and bigger, and eventually, okay, you got to organize it and slice it apart and put these pieces someplace. And modules is the tool that PowerShell has really given us to like organize it and collect those. So I kind of want to start kind of jump right in here and clean up real quick. I think naming is one of the hardest challenges in computer science. Like
especially if you do like the verb.
Yeah. Just invoke everything.
Although I do like verb.
Oh really? Isn't there like a verb? Yeah, you
get
a verb.
But their website is great because actually, if you're like, hey, I want to use encrypt as verb, if you go to the website, you search for encrypt, it'll actually say, instead of, it'll say like use protect, and it'll actually say in the notes like use this instead of encrypt. You can actually like, it's not like great, it doesn't have everything, but it does have
PowerShell thesaurus.
Yeah, it has a little bit of that on there.
Hey, that's a big PowerShell thesaurus.
Ooh, there you go. Yeah, like I'm.
Oh, did you? Casey, I haven't been on Reddit all day. So.
That's the.
PowerShell.
Ooh, there you go. Even better.
PowerShell PS.
As long as you put your help in the example, so it explains what it is, I think it passed my test. Now I'm always staring at this list. Like, okay, what do I call this thing now? And yeah. Yeah, where versus remove or whatever else. Okay, so starting on the path of modules, it's like you have your script and you're starting to break things out into functions, right? So I'm starting with probably one of the most basic functions, just a nice little get info. And I see PowerShellers, as they grow in skill, there's this curve where their scripts just get larger and larger and larger, like 1,000 lines, 2,000 lines. And eventually, it just gets crazy to even look at the script because all these pieces, and you're scrolling to find things. So functions is like one of the ways to kind of help us combat that, right? If you're like adding regions to your big script, a function generally is kind of about in the same scope. And then as you're adding to your scripts, you're still at the beginning maybe putting them in the same file. You're trying to figure out, okay, where do I put this? How do I get this large actual script down to something smaller, more manageable? And so one of the ways, the first way that people learn or discover is like dot sourcing. Like there is a little dot here, which is easier to see on this screen. And this will it'll execute this script and import it into this session. So if I'm defining variables or functions, it's going to dot source it into this current active session that I'm running. So in this case, we run this, And the system catches up with me. Ooh, I need to adjust my scroll a little bit, I think. There we go. We're just scrolling off the bottom. Ooh. And I suppose before I get too deep, I should mention that all of these scripts and modules are out on my GitHub page. GitHub, not quite. And so this one's the module presentation. And what I like about GitHub is you can always click download and grab it as a zip file to get all the scripts. And if you are following along remotely, you know, I've kind of like just broken each section out into little pieces here. So as I run these, the scripts are actually here on the side. All right, so jumping back into it. So while we learned dot sourcing as a way to like pull your functions back in, I really wish that the use of import module, in fact, I think I lost the script here. So modifying stuff on the fly. I think for the purposes of why you're doing it, they'd be the same. I think there's some subtle nuances, like, in fact, I'll show you one of them here. Verbose to. Okay, so by dot sourcing, I'm just getting the function to my scope, right? So I can do the, you know, get info 1, I can tab complete, and it's there. Get command, get info, when it'll list the function. So if I do import module on the PS1 file, and I guess just to show there's no real magic to these things, there's still that same basic function, and we're just going to just reuse him over and over with maybe a slightly different verbose message. So when I import the PS1, you know, I can see it loads it from the path. It's dot sourcing, and it's actually internally it's doing a dot source for the PS1. So I think when you're doing a PS1 file, it might effectively be the same. If I do F8, we can see it hits the box. But if I search for modules that have info in the name, I don't expect to see much here, but this one we just imported. Because I called import module on this script file, he kind of shows up as a module when I do get module. So that's one of the differences you'll see between dot sourcing and calling the import module. Scope will be different, and I'll loop back and actually explain that a little bit later in the same talk. Okay, so I think the preferred way, and like I said, I wish this was recommended more, was instead of dot sourcing the script files, do an import module on them. I kind of find that little dot is hard to read and can escape the eye when you're looking at stuff. And eventually, when I was first learning dot sourcing, I was confusing it with having to dot reference the file. Sometimes I'd be like, okay, I've got it referenced. Is that the dot source? I don't know. That's not right. So let me do, and I'd just beginner type issues there. Excuse me. I think if you execute it this way, it will run the script, but it will be in its own scope. Yeah. So if you're actually doing things to the system, it'll run those commands, like formatting C drive, right? It'll do that for you. But getting the command and variables back into your session is the big difference there. All right. And I'm all about, I don't like things to hide from me. I like my code to tell me, hey, something's probably wrong here. And little dots like that or backticks are things that set me off. Okay, so then importing a real module. So in this case, I'm going to take that same PS1 file and just rename it, PSM1. So we take a peek at them. It's the same function, slightly different message with the PSM1 name. And now when we run the import on them, we can see we're loading the module and it's actually showing the importing and exporting of functions. I don't really get why it's saying import in the list, or both, but I'll roll with it. And if we run this guy, we're executing that function. When we do the get module on this guy now, I see I've got the info2 and get info3, and since I've loaded it, it recognizes this module has a command that's exported.
So it's imported.
Yeah, it's like once it imports it, it did the whole AST parse and figure out what's in there. That way when you do the get module in the future, it just knows exported commands, here's these properties. It knows what's in it. Okay, so then so as we grow up, we're going to build and grow this into a more rich of a module. The next thing you generally start to look at is, there's a command called export module member. That's as you're writing functions, you generally only you'll have some that are like your public interface that you always want to call and use outside of your modules to interact with it. But you might have some that just might be just really ugly, short, quick commands that are used inside your module to do helper stuff that don't necessarily need to be exposed to the greater system. And the use of export module member kind of helps with that. So if I pop open this file here, and let's make this a little bit bigger, I guess. Here's where I got a basic getInfo for function, but here I'm calling some internal helper function to get the class name. I don't have to, but just as an example of something that's internal only. And then this guy here is just another function that's returning a string in this case. But by using this export module member and giving a function, I'm saying only make getInfo for a public. So as a way to hide this one from the rest of the world. So as we load this one, we can see in the import functions that it's just the getInfo for. We can call it just the same. And since he was calling that class, I know that he called that as a function. In fact, I should probably add a little bit of verbosity in that just so we see it. But and then I did my get module on this. I see that they're exporting the O4 command and not the other one. And when I try to call the class, he's obviously going to not be able to find it. If you do need to call your stuff internally, more for testing and validation, back to our pester references from earlier, there's a in-module scope command that says inside the scope of info4, call this command. So here's a way I can prove that. There we go. So inside the scope of this module, I'll be able to call that function, whereas sitting outside it, I won't ever be able to. So this is purely, to call this function like this, in this way, this is purely when you want to test something, right? It's like, so ideally, your tests should live outside of your module and kind of call it from the public side for the most part. So yeah, if you're hiding those private internal functions from the world, you're kind of also hiding them from your tests. And well, generally I'm pretty aggressive about having good test coverage and help for all my public functions. I do leave a little more slack for the internal ones because they tend to be a little bit more flexible. You can make more fluid changes inside of something as long as the outside tests pass. The other scenario, which I'll talk a little bit more about, is classes. Classes are really hard to export externally from a module where you might be building a module where all your functions are just public. You don't care because it's just you on your own system. But when we start using classes in your modules, they're really great for DSC and really awkward for anything else. And testing and validation is one of the things that's really awkward to do with them because they're scoped inside the module versus external to it. So the next thing is you can, all right, so we got a module just by taking a file and calling it a PSM1. If we start adding a little bit more structure to it, if you place your module in a folder where the folder name and the PSM1 name match, you can actually just call import module in the folder. So here we're saying you'll see more, this structure is starting to fit more with what you'll see with the other modules. So here, if I just import this guy, we see we get the function, I can run it, but that naming is very important, and I think case definitely matters on Linux, and I think I've had some weird case issues on certain versions of PowerShell. Okay, so we're going to touch now for our module into a folder. If you have just generic scripts, like I'd often have my controller script set outside, and then it might just import the module to have all of the functions inside of it that the script can use. So if you're still doing this pattern where you have your script with your stuff next to it, you could probably use this, but it'll kind of like slowly shift away from it as we go further on here. An important variable to know is your PS module path variable. This is where PowerShell will look to auto-load modules from. So if on my system, I've got a few extra module paths on here, but at a default, these are the three that you should have on your system on a clean build. I prefer to install all my modules in the user scope, but install module name. Let's do depends on, and I want to set scope current user. So,
let's do an important thing.
okay, so the important thing this does for you is I do not need to be an administrator to install a module into my profile. If I want to install the system, which is the default scope, by the way.
You get it.
I'm trying to autocomplete for me here. Install module scope. Yeah, all users. That's the other scope, is all users. Ooh, so going down that tangent. So by default, it installs into all users. When you register a repository, like if your gallery drops off, you need to re-register it, or you're doing something internally or private, that is specific to the user profile. So if you log into a system and you set a repository and you have some other script that runs a system or other account, he also needs to register the repository for himself. There is a thread out there where they're discussing ways to make that like an option to do it system-wide, but I haven't seen that released yet. So yeah, I like tossing all my modules into my user scope here. There are 2 more locations. It is generally frowned upon to drop modules into the System32 PowerShell modules folder. I think back in the days of early PowerShell, and heck, even some weird DSC nuances in version 4, you had to muck around in there. But generally anymore, everything will usually run out here.
How much of that changes
PowerShell 6, the names will be different. They have different default paths. So, oh no. I don't have PowerShell 6 on the system yet, because I just rebuilt it. But the big difference is they dropped Windows from the name, and I think, I don't think this is in the system folder anymore either. It's actually already released, PowerShell 6, but it's a side-by-side. So your PowerShell 5.2 or 5, whatever version we're on, they're not going to add any major features to it, but you can install PowerShell 6 on the system beside it. And if you're on a Windows box, they got a good compatibility toolkit to where if somebody had built a module that only worked on PowerShell 5, from your PowerShell 6 session, it'll do some fancy like PS remoting back to your box in order to call and execute any other module you have. So if you have something that's just not working in PowerShell 6, I think there's a Windows, I think it's just the Windows compatibility module that gives you a special import command. So it's just like import module, but it's probably like import PS compatible module, and you can call the functions just like normal, but behind the scenes, it's done like a PS session, and it's still your own box executing all the commands. It'll still suffer from like a double hop problem you might experience working with remoting, but it's been a good compromise for a lot of those when there's local to your system. And there's quite a few other modules that have been ported over as it is. So continuing on with the module path, if I so the install module allows you to install from a gallery, but if you have a module in your hand, you can just copy into that folder and it'll effectively kind of be installed. There's one slight difference though, that if you copy it in by hand, you cannot use uninstall module or update module to update it. So uninstall module, remove module, whatever the command is, only works on stuff that it's actually installed itself. So in this case, I'm actually going to take this 06 module, I'm going to copy it into my profile here. And the reason why I'm doing that is so that, let me take a peek, make sure. All right, I got quite a few modules in my user scope, but here's our 06 info that we just copied in. And I can call get module now, list available, and it will show me this module being on my system, because by name now, it can find it in one of those 3 locations. And then if I actually just call it, it will auto-import. It should auto-import. Oh, thank you. There we go. Auto-import the 06 module from that location. So that's the real value of not only putting your functions into a module and defining and making sure your exported modules is listed appropriately. That way, it can actually find them real easily. There's some nuances where sometimes if you're not exporting them cleanly, right, your execution will find them, but it's kind of an expensive operation. So if you're like building a module and you can get those exports correctly, and I'll probably dive into here in a moment, the general command speed on your system will be better. So every time you run a command, well, it'll cache for a period of time, but when you run a command, it's going to check all of these PSM1 files to see if that command exists in there, if it can't find it somewhere else. And if you're not cleanly exporting the list, they'll take the performance hit. There are some, there's an automatic variable that manages that module import preference. So I think on your Windows 10 and desktop systems, it's set to all. But I think on different versions of Windows Server, and more on the older ones, like I think 2012, it's probably set to none. I can't remember if 2012 R2 server had auto loading by default or not. But regardless, if you're finding stuff isn't loading like it's supposed to, one way is you can enable the auto loading, and it'll look for those default paths. There's one special one here, the module qualified, and that is whenever you're calling a command, you can actually call it by the module name / the command name. It's rare you see people do that, but as a good module author, it's probably not a bad idea if you're doing something like in a public community. But if I did like a ps graph / node, like if I need to differentiate this node from like node.exe, like there's issues where you might have to have colliding. If you actually specify the full module name in front of it, you'll always get the version you're looking for. And that's specifically what this property is. I've never used this setting. I've always just been in all.
You have to have that.
No, you just need that for the auto importing to work, okay. And it'll only work for fully qualified stuff. That way, if you're in a generic command, it won't find it. But if you fully qualify it, it'll go look for it. But this is back to, yeah. Okay, so then we've taken the PSM1 about as far as we can take. There's another file in your module, the module manifest. And if I run PO7, yeah, so right now I've only got like the PSM1, and that just contains raw PowerShell. We can create a manifest, which is like a little info file that sits right next to it. And if I take a peek at this file, the PSD1, it's a giant hash table. Like it's a config file, but if you really look at it, this guy is just a hash table. So you can use some magic to import it if you need to work with it, but just knowing that it's a hash table is valuable sometimes.
So isn't this hash?
Actually, yeah, like yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure if it was in there or just use a root. It seems I think I've read or I've seen other.
That's really.
Yeah. The key properties, I guess, that you start off with is the RIP module. You actually have to tell it where the PSM1 is. So if there is no PSD1 in the folder, it'll automatically look for a PSM1. Where the PSD1 is there, it'll load just that. So your PSD1, your data file, needs to tell it if it needs to load the module file or not. Versions of default, GUID, should probably give everybody a unique GUID, which is generated automatically when we're running this command here to create a new module manifest. And some of these are defaults, and I'll look back to a couple of these keys. But to show us that we can import, we'll run the import off the folder now. We can see it first load the PSD1, then it loads the PSM1 to actually get us the functions out of it. And I think we were taking a look at this guy. So we've been talking about functions to export a little bit through the module members. And here on the 08 module, I removed the line that says export module members. So remember this guy here, export module members function? The data file gives us a different way to do that. So if you're using the data file to export your functions, and you should, I'll explain in a moment, you can go ahead and remove the line from your PSM1 because it actually has, it'll actually like double filter. So if you accidentally leave something off in one file and the other one, like you're not going to get, they're basically going to not match up like you'd expect them to. So here's, we're going to make the manifest for the 08 file here, and I'm hard coding defining the functions to export. I'm also setting these other ones to empty arrays versus empty strings, and that's another one of those, for some reason it's a performance issue if it's an empty string versus an array. So the recommendation is that, at least on PowerShell 5, I think they've resolved it in 6, but that you should set these 4 specifically, if there's nothing in them, to an empty array. In this case, we want the info 8. Yeah, they would actually. I think the script analyzer rules would probably complain about that. So here we create the manifest, And if I take a peek at the manifest itself, it's exactly the values we shoved in there. Functions to export, let's export. And if you're actually just it actually created it from scratch. So if I were to have delete, not that one, delete this guy, the new module manifest is actually overwriting the file that's there. And there is descriptions on all these, as you can kind of see, lots of text that doesn't wrap very well in PowerShell script, but there's explanation for many of these. All right, so we import our file. Oh, why'd you fail? Okay. Oh, I did delete my PSM1 instead. Thankfully. So the Git integration, that's kind of what I flashed over here, is even locally, I've got my folder of just garbage scripts. It is still in a local Git repo, even if I'm not publishing it anywhere. Because every day or so I'll commit what I have, and then I can always go back to what was there, or quick undos when I delete the wrong thing. So highly recommend it. And I love the Git integration with VS Code. So All right. So I run the get module on this guy. Get module 08. Here it's still listing just that get info 8, and I can see where it parsed and processed both files to see all the functions that are in there. But I'm assuming the import is when they're actually saying it's to that list of things that get exposed. Other manifest properties, I guess, while we're looking at this thing here, if we jump down towards this later section, private data, if you're publishing to the gallery, to a public repo, I think you have to at least list the license URL and maybe even the project URI. These again are just other generic keys in this giant hash table. A couple specific ones I want to look at is the required modules. So if you have a module that yours depends on, if you place it in the required module and auto loading is enabled, it will auto import that module before your module loads.
That auto preference.
Yeah.
It was not what.
Okay. Yeah, and there's two syntaxes here. One is just a list of strings, but in this array, you could also list off the cuff here, but there's a name, effectively a module name property. I think it's module graph, and then there's minimum version equals something else. Anyways, if this is too soft, not getting specifically what you need, there's some options to grab some more exact criteria. And I think I've got an example here in this internal module where, here I'm listing this module of ours requires these two other modules to be loaded when they run. The other nice thing, or other detail, is if you're publishing to a repo or gallery, that the required modules, it will check to make sure that those exist in the gallery you're publishing to. So one weird nuance with PowerShell get is it only when you install something. Ooh, and there's the flip side too, is if you install from a gallery and a module list is required, it will also install that from the same gallery. So in this case, if I wanted to install just my LDX set and I did not have these two other modules on my system, because they're required, PowerShell get will also install both these modules for me. It's a way to kind of group and coalesce or collect modules if that's needed.
Will it actually?
It will it will import them as well, but like I said, if your auto loading isn't working on the box, or so I think on your desktop it probably should, but if auto loading is working, it will auto not only install it but also import it. If it's not, it will say, hey, this module is required and it's not there, go load it. That's the type of error message that you get back if it wasn't. There's a second very similar property called nested modules. And he will auto import the module, but he's doing something weird where he's actually importing it inside the scope of the module where it's defined. So in this case, I'm actually importing a module from a DLL, and it's basically staying inside the module. So the gotcha there is, so it won't, depending on your filters of things, like if you're actually defining your functions to export, only your functions will be exported, right? But if you're leaving that wide open to star or whatever it can be, and you import a nested module of, I don't know, like PS Jira, we're now also going to export all the PSJIRA commands with your module if you're using a nested module. It's like, it's a child of mine. It comes with me. But if you're, whereas the required module just make sure it gets loaded first, and it's whatever version is there. And so in that case, like if it's already loaded, it won't have to load it again, which in a roundabout way means this nested modules will load it a second time. So if you have something weird where you don't want your module loaded twice in the same session, the nested modules will have multiple copies of your modules loaded. Yeah, I'm going to actually show us how to create one here. So, in fact, yeah. And then while we're talking about requires, I guess if you have a script, you can specify requires a specific module. And if you have auto loading enabled, I think the requires should auto load that required module. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, other module patterns. Okay, so far I've shown you like just, like we've got the script that's running through the module, we got a PSD1 next to the PSM1. Up until now, we've kind of shoved all of our code in the PSM1 file. So a really common pattern you see as you start doing more DevOps or development type approach is that you create like a single function or a single file for each function and put in like a subfolder or something. So the baby steps is your PSM1 file will basically like walk and dot source all of the functions in the child folder. Yes. So here's a module that's just at a high level. I don't really care about the contents as much, but that like this TFVC folder is like the root of my module, and in there I've got a folder for all of my public functions. That's kind of how I categorize and group stuff. And I've got quite a few in this one, and I've also got classes. But each file is its own function. That's all that's in there, generally. Here, workspace, I have an example, and then each parameter, and this counts these inline comments. So there's two ways to do the help. You can do like dot parameter force, and you can put your help here. But you can also do an inline comment here, and the get help system will recognize that as the help for that property. Yeah.
Oh, in the parameter.
In the parameter. So when I do like get help for item parameter path. Yeah. So it pulls it right from. I kind of prefer that to this, mostly because 9 times out of 10, the parameters are pretty self-explanatory, and I feel like I'm almost repeating the same thing in the comment. So if I'm going to like have it close, just have it close versus retyping it. But I mean, like the workspace. Like I don't know how to describe the workspace any more than that. If you know what TFVC is, like it's. And okay, I didn't want to change that, but that's okay. But see, but there's the pattern here where I have all my functions in a public folder. If I take a look at, so what that means is if I am doing that, I have to import and load all my functions. Here is a example like autoloader that basically I'd paste this inside the PSM1 file, and I'm going to refer to this as the development PSM1, where I say I'm importing functions. I'm going to walk these common folders. So I tend to have a private, a public, a classes, and like a general imports folder. And basically the script root is the root of the module. I make sure that the folder exists, and I get each item. And then down here at the end, I walk each one, and I dot source it. So I generally don't like dot sourcing. Here's a case where I definitely do use it. And I also like to add like a right verbose here, so I see it list which modules it's importing. Oh yeah. What's semicolon? What's semicolon? Yeah, all the funness. So.
What's wrong with for each object? It's a performance thing. Not even works fine, but
Yeah. So ideally.
Kind of like where.
File in.
Kind of like where. Yeah, all those pipeline commands are really practically doing stuff. Java doing simple stuff, but the pipelines in general not very performant. And by its very nature, Java is where you're doing lots of things.
Then.
You really kill people off percent.
And then another nuance while we're yeah. Yeah, I'm fine with that. If we just start golfing things. But that's I always like that S hides. Like I can lose myself if I just leave that S there. So I'll always change the names enough that I can distinguish them as separate things. Okay, so as a dev module, right? So I can do import module and target the PSM1 or the PSD1 inside my my project to load all my modules. Now you can publish them that way, but the recommendation is to build everything into one PSM1 file for actual distribution. And the reason for that is each file you're dot sourcing is not only an I/O hit off the disk, but it's also a PowerShell AST parse and analyze. So if you can get all of your code into a single file for deployment or delivery, it loads it once and it parses it once, and your modules on your system will load faster. I do. Yep. Exactly. So what's nice about having it split up is I get good source control management. Like I can do a single file, I can look at the history of it, revert it back. Like
how do you do it? Copy
yeah. So I generally have like a build script in every module that I click on the build, and it's going to do something actually like this here below, where I take the next step where instead of dot sourcing it, we basically have a path where I'm doing the exact same logic, but I'm adding it to a file in my output folder. So yeah, my build creates the folder, copies my PSD1 file, which isn't listed here, but then I generate the PSM1 file from scratch based off of concatenating the contents of these specific folders.
It's really easy to just use the others.
Yeah. The other thing I like about having individual files for each function is that I tend to have like a dumping module where I dump all the garbage in, and when I see this group and cluster, I can like copy paste, or I can lift those and drag them to a new module as a way to like juggle them around.
So like internally, you guys.
Yep. Yeah. And it's that build script where I tend to run my pester test as well. So I do the build, and then then it imports the built module, and my pester runs off of my final artifact. That way, I could test my dev version, but I'm not testing what I'm delivering. And if you find weird nuances, it's best to test the thing that's actually being, out the door. But I do give myself shortcuts to, like, locally, I import the dev version of the module, and I'll run the test there for some quick local dev. But when I'm done, I do nice clean builds, and then our build server as well. Once we check in to our repository, we've got a gated build that will build it and validate it on the output artifact. No, I don't.
Shout out.
Yeah. I'll probably claim time here at the end if we want to bounce off questions, and I could probably loop back into it a little bit more. And then here's this LDX set is one that I've got another internal function of ours, but you can see actually a breakout of public versus private, where some of these are uglier functions that might just be poorly named, but versus all the public ones. So they're definitely internal, like nobody should really care about or see what's in those. So I've got this advanced pattern. Every once in a while, at least twice now, a couple times I've ran into a scenario where I need to have a bunch of like DLLs loaded. So if I'm doing I got some package where I load the DLL and I'm like calling like C# commands out of it directly, and especially if it's large, I will actually move those libraries into their own module because they tend to be updated less often. Like they're fairly static and they're kind of heavy. Whereas my code, I'm ripping this all the time, and I don't want every time I do an update somebody to have to download that full package for every version. So one thing I've done, especially this TFEC module that's out in the gallery, I took the libraries which were super large and just ugly and a pain to deal with, completely out of. I put them in their own lib folder, and then the way I import them is in the PSD1 file. I say required assemblies. So instead of doing like add type or add partial with name, I can use the PSM1, this required assemblies, to load these DLLs for me. And that's kind of one way I can like repackage these things as their own thing, and then I write my function just kind of like piggyback off of that. So I suppose it's more of a pattern to be aware of if you ever find yourself going down that path. And then in the PSD1 for this guy, I just list him as a required module so that I know that he gets installed and loaded whenever I need those DLLs. So it's a really complex way to not have to do like an add type, but I know these modules, this module will only get loaded once. They'll be in the DLLs, be in scope, and I'll like error handling and checking other weird nuances with that. So which loops me back to binary modules. You guys do any C# at all? Okay, I kind of glossed over this a little bit, but I've got a blog post that runs through this. But to basically build a binary module that uses C# instead of PowerShell, we can run a few commands here that will create a folder, change the directory. We can install the standard module template using the .NET command. So you have to have like the .NET SDK, and then if that didn't error on me. Yeah, so I suppose as a quick demo, I run these 6 commands because that's what I copy and pasted from the website. And then I ran the build, which succeeded, or at least there were no errors. And inside the package, there's a DLL file. If I just crack this guy open here, 9 bin, this is my output from the debug. We see this DLL file. It's going to include the test sample commandlet that came with the project. So you kind of have the starting point of what a commandlet looks like, which if you don't know C#, this is really ugly, so I'm not going to dive into too much there. But the cool thing is I can actually just import this DLL directly, this DLL, with an import module. And if I do a get module on it, I should see that, oh, let's rerun that so I can get visibility. By importing this DLL, it exported the functions. So I can actually have this test sample commandlet exported. But this is very much like importing the PSM1 file. Personally, I like to, actually here's running the commandlet, which just, no, all right, yeah, thank you. There's executing the commandlet, and then, so like I said, so this is important to the DLL. I like to wrap these in a normal PowerShell module. So I'm more likely to, actually my depends on module is exactly that, where my manifest, where'd that guy go? I did, yeah. My depends on, oh hey, come on in. Thank you. Well, for the PSD one. So here where I'm importing my PSM1 file, and then down here below, somewhere, as a nested module, I'm loading the DLL. So my build script in this case does the normal C# build and gets that DLL to the output, and then does my module build to get all my files in the right spot. And the way it's actually constructed is with, so this example is more I'm going to call it a hybrid module because I'm using my normal structure, so I can actually mix in normal PowerShell commandlets plus the C# commandlets if that's what I want to do. I went, and for my depends on module, I went with a slightly different approach where, okay, I wanted to build something, the whole purpose of this module was that I had a list of things that I wanted to define dependencies and have the whole list sorted based off of the dependencies that I defined. So very much like the DSC depends on. I want to be able to use markup like that and have my list in the right order. And I felt like that's one of those that could get big and ugly fast, and I wanted to be as fast as possible. So one of the reasons you go to C# is for speed, and I actually wrote it all in C# first, but I was missing some of that syntactic sugar that I wanted out of PowerShell. So I decided to cheat a little bit, because I put my core logic in a class in the CLL that I just made public so that I could instantiate a copy of it. And then in my actual module, I wrote the function I'm going to call, and it resolved dependency order, which has an alias of depends on. And what he's doing is I jump in here is creating an instance of the class. So now I've exposed my C# as an object. Don't mind this name. I was doing something clever there. But basically, and I have this object where I can now call the properties and methods on. So I can leverage C# or PowerShell for what it does best. In this case, it was script block processing. Like my example here is that I have all these objects, say I got a name and it depends on property. And I want to annotate saying on this object array for each item, the key is the name property and the depends on is the depend on property. since this is a script block, this could be a reference to a REST API, or it could be calling something else. Like I'm just executing PowerShell there for each item. Super simple in PowerShell, super ugly in C#. So I kind of did the best of both worlds. I'm like, all right, let me parse this once with PowerShell and execute. And so my parameters here are script blocks and script blocks, right? And then the clever thing I'm doing, I guess, is here I'm doing for each one, depends on value, is I'm taking my object, I'm piping for each object, and I'm giving it a script block, which is just the parameter. So I'm getting super clever here, right? But it's a clever way to execute a script block for each item. And to me, it was a nice clean way in PowerShell, but it would have been so gross in C#. But then the actual raw performance of adding this to the internal library and putting it in order, I was able to bounce out to C# for that. And I don't even know if I want to look at this code, because I haven't seen it in forever. But I basically got a container where I add stuff, and then I don't know where the real logic is. Queue object. Anyways, I'm doing stuff where I'm like looping and walking the entire collection. So as it gets bigger, it gets slower, but that's why I built this hybrid module this way. Still kind of an advanced idea, but if you're ever going down that path, that's a pattern you can lean on. Okay. Then the other demo I want to show you is actually how to publish to a gallery. Like I've talked about it quite a bit as you've built your module, and in this case we're actually doing a build to get a nice clean PSM1 file. But if you're wanting to publish to the PowerShell gallery or even to an internal private gallery, there's actually a couple of simple commands that do it. In fact, when I first discovered this, it was way easier than I ever thought it would be. So you can do it to a file share, and so you can have two different types of galleries. One is like a file system or file share based. I think that's good for very small numbers of modules or testing or validation type scenarios. Like for production, personally, I'd lean on like a NuGet feed or other type of actual repository. But for this demo, this would be perfect. So I'm going to do just a local folder here on my C drive, and let's create the folder so it doesn't crash. I think it's already loaded. So I'm going to register a new repository on this. In fact, let me do a get ps repository, see what I do have. And I've got the public one, the PowerShell gallery, and then I've got our DevOps internal one. And then I'm going to register a new one. So we're going to say the name, the source path where it gets the packages from, and the publish location is usually always the same value. So I'm going to just send it this path, and I'm going to set this one to be trusted. So when I run this, and I do a get, I can now see my repository is listed as a trusted one amongst the others. And then if I want to publish one, that 06 module, this is one that I dumped into my module path. So because it's able to be discovered, I can actually by name, or it's already loaded, and I wanted to. By name, I can publish it to this repository. So I'm going to go ahead and publish this one. Oh no, it does not have a module manifest file. Let's try roulette here. Let's try 7. This one might not load because module directory. All right. Well, let's publish this other module then. Maybe that's why I have him here. So the 06 failed, just backing up, because he's looking for a PSD one. So they actually enforce some best practices. So you have to have your data file listing certain properties. And let me publish this one here. Cross my fingers. And there we go. We published it. So now I can search for, using find module in that repository, it's going to list that version that's in my local gallery. I think it's going to be in like a new spec file, maybe.
Oh, so it's
Yep. So it's actually PowerShell get is truly just wrapping around NuGet. So all those commands are really calling NuGet in a way to create the new spec and the NUPKG file to upload it. And so really a PowerShell gallery is a fancy NuGet feed with, I think, has additional tags and properties. When I'm talking about galleries, definitely separate your modules from other packages and objects. So we have a second feed that is our Chocolatey packages. So that's how we do all of our installs is through Chocolatey. I initially tried to just reuse the same feed, but the install module will find, it was finding stuff twice. So if I publish to it, it'd find not only the module version of the publish, but also like a generic, what was it? There's something silly where I saw the module come back in twice, and if I didn't filter down to the one that I was published via the one that's listed as a PS module versus just a package, the install module would try to install it, but it would choke because it didn't understand what to do with it. So so PowerShell get is doing some wrapper around that. And then on the flip side, if I did just install package from the chocolatey type commands, it was like downloading it and putting it in like the chocolatey bin folder, but not doing anything with it. So it wouldn't actually install it on my system. It would just like download it and cache it. So I caught these weirdness where rule of thumb for me now is modules get their own feed separate from other stuff because they're kind of the same, but they're actually abusing, I think, some of the logic. Let's see here. For module, find module, depends on. Tips and tricks. Okay. Classes, I've already mentioned they're kind of a nightmare working with classes. I find that they don't, oh no, I don't need you anymore. Actually, let me jump back. I want to look at one more thing in that depends on module. If you're doing gallery publishing, in my manifest, PSD1, versions 5, because I'm using .NET Core, I didn't want to care about backwards compatibility so much, so I just pinned this guy at version 5.1. So that way he won't load on 4.0, and I just left that as a requirement. I cut over to 5.1 a long time ago, so I'm having systems to test 4.0 on. So it'd be disingenuous to actually deploy it and let people think they could use it if I haven't even tested it there myself. All right, so aliases export, my nested module for my DLL, and then the functions. And then here's where I was talking about having the license URL and the project URL defined. If I didn't have those two, it would kick back and say you're missing these specific properties. Tags, I think if I label it as core, it shows as .NET Core support if you're filtering on that. And then I'm also tagging all of our stuff internally with loanDepot so that I can leverage it in some internal logic. Like when I've got an update LD module command on our side that if I have it listed as loanDepot, I feel more aggressive about cleaning and purging it from the system. But if it's not listed as that, I just install it side by side with the old version. So I know some modules like Pester and actually PowerShell Get, I can't ever delete the old version. And I just want to fix my logic and I could try. And then I don't know what people would have loaded external to what we're managing. Anyways, because I have tags, it's just logic I could filter on and do something special with later. Okay, so back to classes. Things to be aware of if you are going down the class route. Like I said, GSC configs, custom resources, definitely the way to go. But if you're trying to use them for anything else, the gotchas to be aware of is that you can't like really re-import the module cleanly if you have classes. It's like sometimes the class logic kind of gets, in a way, just think of being cached. Like it feels like your stuff is working and reloading because you're updating your functions and the code is working, but all of a sudden you hit something that you're in a class and it's not. And it's all about that it's basically loaded your class once. And although it's reloading your module over and over, it's your first import of a class that kind of wins. So it's a way to spend a lot of frustrating time debugging. For me, if I'm dealing with classes, I reload like almost every import. So sometimes, and if I'm doing the interactive, like in VS Code, I'll just reload the whole window, or come down here and just close the session, and then it says, you want to restart? Yes. And then I'm off and going. Like that's about as quick as it takes me to reload the session. If I'm out on the open shell doing stuff, the actual hack I do all the time is, I'm in the middle of it and I need a clean session. I just type PowerShell and I go on. So I'm messing PowerShell sessions, but as long as I don't do it for too long, it's not sucking too much memory, as a way to do some quick revs. Or even better, your history will remember itself and your working directory. So I will be in, workspace, CD, depends on. So I'll do my invoke builds or whatever. If I have a dirty session, I can hop into the next one, and I should be in the same directory. So instead of like closing and opening and going back to your directory, I use that a lot. Or I'll exit and then PowerShell. Kind of. So on the left is the module poshgit. Module poshgit. Yeah. So this guy is adding Git-based info to my shell here. And if I go to somebody else, CD like here's my master branch. So it's actually showing my branch, and then like, do I have changes in flight, or am I stale, or do I got changes behind, is what that other notation there is. The posh get module is worth it alone if for nothing else it's the autocomplete that it adds. So if I go, depends on, I got get, how many branches in here? Get checkouts. If I start typing M and hit tab, it knows I have a master branch and autocompletes it for me. So if you get nothing else from the stock and you're using Git, the posh Git module alone is worth it. And even for the more obscure tags, right? If I'm doing, ooh, Git merge, actually let's do double dash. Like, oh, I need something else. Like, I can't remember what it is. You can like tab through stuff to find things. So that is a lifesaver. And this issue with classes is actually just as big of an issue as with loading DLLs in your session. In fact, this trick here I do all the time where I'll actually intentionally nest my PowerShell. So I'll start a session and I'll go PowerShell. Then I'll do my build and testing. And when I need to do a new build, I'll actually exit to free up any resources like locks on files and DLLs. And I'll open a new PowerShell window so I can do that back and forth again multiple times. I have at least one case built that logic into my build script. So when I hit build, he's actually starting a new PowerShell session to do the build, loading, and the testing, and then he exits. But it's that nuance of sometimes you want to keep your stuff in the bad state so you can debug and test and see stuff versus it closing and losing that. But that's one of those nuances that if you start doing the binary modules or classes, that just remember fresh sessions, that will save you a lot of headaches. Loading classes is also kind of an issue in PowerShell, specifically if they depend on each other. So one reason why people use classes is because you can do what's called inheritance, where I can have a common object with properties, and I can have a second object that has just one new property that inherits all the properties from the one below it. So it's more of a dev pattern, but basically there's ways to get several classes to depend on other classes. And if we're doing that dot source trick where you walk all the files and import them, if you import a class that depends on something else and is not loaded yet, it throws an error. So you have to figure out a way to load dependencies in the right order if you're having that problem. There's a couple tricks. One trick I've done is for classes is actually just concatenate all the classes together into one file, kind of like the build we're doing at the end. I will concatenate the classes and then import those. And I'm mostly referring to like the dev module. So what I like about my PSM1 that dot sources and imports all the individual scripts for the dev side is when I'm debugging, I'm stepping into the file where the code sits. If I make changes, it's changing it on disk in the right spot. Versus if I'm debugging to my modules in the output, I change something and do a new build, I just lost my change because I didn't realize I wasn't working on my file, I was working on the output module. So that's one of those nuances you get when things get more complex. Classes is a stupid fight where I'm like, I want to be able to debug into everything else. If I want to give up classes, I can do that weird trick there. I started doing something really complex with my depends on module to figure out dependencies. I don't think I have this published externally yet. I'm trying to think of the best module to show where it lives. LD, it's a new window. It's ugly, but it works really, really well. I need to find a way to make this guy a little bit more packaged to be consumed easier. LDX, probably my, test framework. I think I have classes in there. And then, now, I'm saying this for the dev side, like for my final artifact, everything's in the PSM1, and I'm getting published that way. But when I'm doing it locally, things are getting loaded individually. I have a really ugly set of code, which is why it's not public yet, where I walk all my files to figure out the order to load them in. So all of this, I think, to here is all about walking the files, trying to figure out or predict which one depends on the other one, using my depends on to sort them in the right order, and then import them up the list. Yeah, I'm not gonna have it. It's ugly, but that is one approach. And then, so yeah, it's part of my dev import. So what I'm working on now, actually, I'll loop back to that because I got some more to talk about on that than just import. Using module scope for testing. Oh yeah, so for classes, because you don't export them very easily, use the in-module scope to test them inside Vesta, right? So, okay, global module scope. So since you're either dot sourcing or creating a one PSM1 file, if you need variables that are global to everything inside the module, effectively, script scoped variables are accessible from all your functions. So if you're building something that's got like a cache to it, like a get something, a set something, and clear cache, you can shove them into a script scoped variable that is just available across everything inside your function. Everything inside your module. Every function inside your module, including your classes, have. I mean, it's effectively a module scope, but it's honestly script scope because everything is in the same script scope. That's why you can use the script scope tag. One thing I like to do in all of my modules is I create a PS module root variable that is usually assigned to the PS script root, and then I reference and build off of that. The reason why is partially because I have different structure with my dev module and my artifact, right? So in my dev module, every function is in a subfolder, and its script root is different than the artifact that's all in the one PSM1 file. So if I need something that's common to the root of my project, I create a module root in the same name pattern so I can reference it. And the most common case is when I have a data folder or resources. Like say I have some stupid config in a JSON in the module, I'll put that into the data folder, and then my function will say get content. Well, if I do get content script root, and if my script root is dancing between where I'm at, it's a mess. But if I'm hard pinning this to the root of the module, then my functions can import this, and this will always be consistent, no matter if it's my dev version or my artifact version. So that's the value of having the script root module, is having like a data folder or something that you can reference and reach into easily. Sometimes if I have something that needs templates, I'll have a folder full of templates that it can like enumerate and walk and pull in, or config data. Last important tip, especially if you're doing Git with your projects, is change the encoding of your PSD1 file to either use this script here to do UTF-8, or this is UTF-8 with a bomb, or manually do it without a bomb, depending on your editor settings. The reason why is PowerShell creates it as Unicode, and if you look at the diff inside VS Code or through Git, it can't see the history between the two. Like it's got this garbled mesh of characters, and if you're ever seeing that, that's why. It's the encoding that Git just doesn't, like sometimes it'll show it just fine, like, hey, this is just normal text. But when it comes to actually diffing characters from one to the other, most displays kind of really hose that. And I think if we look at, yeah, so let me take this PSD1 and the 8 info, let me cache this guy. And as soon as I give him my stage changes, I can no longer see what the hell he is. Like it's just garbage. And this is the case where changing your encoding to UTF-8 or something else will keep this readable. And this is annoying too, because it looks fine, you check him in, you do your next diff, it's garbage, you look at your source, like, why is this not cleaned for me? Yeah. I'm sure there's some commands you can put in Git that helps it understand or teases it to do something else, but I've had poor luck getting that to work right, and I just said, I'll just change my encoding. Yeah. Because this guy is, let's say, let me get him out of here first. Yeah, so he's, I think, UTF-16 Little Indian, I think is the Endian. Yeah, I said Indian, but yeah, little Endian versus big Indian. It's when it's caught your problems once, you having that stuff. Now, there used to be a big issue because I think back in the early days, like Mac would transfer over the network over one Endian, and then PC would be the different one, and knowing how your data was coming across was, fun. One trick I've used with a lot of modules is the idea of like creating a connection and then reusing that connection for my commands. So let me crack open, probably meant to do code here. So I've got this, I got this one module. He's talking to Elasticsearch all the time. And I don't want to be specifying my credentials and the endpoint and attributes of that connection for every command that I call, even though it's just hitting a REST endpoint. Because there is no real connection, but I'm providing the same connectivity information over and over and over. So a pattern I've used on this and several other things is I'll create a set of functions around connections. So if I open up this guy, which he's really all about, like, I'll have this like get Elasticsearch connection is what this guy is. And he's just looking at some script scope variables to see if they exist. So I'm basically building a cache in place, and I'm calling my open ES connection. And I'll take a peek at him in a second. So this guy's really just returning friendly, whatever's in this variable. I could litter all my scripts with this variable, but I like having a function in front of it, because that way if I want to change the guts of this to do something else entirely, the rest of my code doesn't have to change, right? If I had this variable with very specific properties on it, like I think I have like a dot, yeah. Anyways, if I can put that in a function, I can change the inner workings of this all I want and not have to worry about it. Like maybe I want to have a timeout cache on this, or who knows, right? So then if I look at an actual, oh, that's why I have that one there. So we're already using Elasticsearch for our log, right? And we kind of manage and own that, and we've invested a lot of, I suppose, effort into working with Elastic. And then we've built this engine. I've talked about it a little bit, right? Where we're taking all this JSON, and what we used to do is we check it in, we do a build that would run for a little bit, it would publish the data to a shared location, and then our commandlets would get the data off the share. Actually, it was a network share, and it would do some live transformation of like tokenization or whatever crazy stuff we wanted to happen. And it was starting to become just too slow. Like all of a sudden we had too many servers, too many endpoints. And for the client side to ask for information and do processing was just too much. So we rethought our pipeline a bit, and because we had Elastic in place, we're kind of like, hey, we can use that as a cache or a store for this information, because querying it is super fast. So we took that tail end effort, moved it forward. So when we check stuff in to source, we do this build that actually expands all of this JSON into very detailed configuration information, and then we shove that into Elastic. And then the tail end, I can say, hey, I want this property, and I can search and filter super fast from that set. So it was kind of, our monster got really big, and we had to solve some of the demons, and Elastic was the answer we had. And so to really make this work is I wrote this module, get LDX get, is the command that gets all of our data. And it replaced an old get command that would get all the old data before. So it was basically he used to be all call like metadata get. We'll call them like version 1. So version 1, it would get the information, and everything else would call that commandlet, right? So as part of the cutover, I built a version LDX get that kept the same function signatures. So I could find and replace one function for the other. And instead of them going to the share, they're now going to Elastic. And our next layer of everything that depended on those functions just worked because we kept that contract the same. Yeah. So that's I suppose a great lesson there is where if you have gate your access to stuff through layers, right? Like just like how I had that one global variable, but I put a function in front of it to get it. Because I might want to do like cache invalidation. I want to maybe put I can even put that value in Elastic or put it into Redis. Like I can change that now, very, very more fluid. And since I had this big data set and there's only one way to talk to it, we can lift and shift what's behind that, and everything that depends on that now still works. Now it was still a lot of work had to be done because there were some things we just couldn't maintain and keep access compatible. But a year ago, we lifted and shifted from the old engine to the new one, and the organization barely noticed. Like 100% of the DevOps automation, every developer's workflow depends on this data set in this engine, and we were able to basically do that flip because we kept that contract, and we had the tests to prove it. It was an almost seamless. Like we were chasing down nuances for the first half day, but the org as a whole had no idea we were really changing anything, which probably one of my biggest accomplishments here, actually. So yeah, exciting. And then here's a case where every command now is saying, get ES connection to go broker that information back. So I'm creating fake connections to hide the realities of it. A new connection here's an open connection. This guy is hiding the logic behind the scenes of the first time this guy gets called. But I have flags in here. Like if I'm doing local Docker for my local dev, I can just add a flag and he kicks it in here. And it's really just a hash table. Well, I guess it's a class with a few properties. the name, the URL, the credential, or saying no authentication or not. This one isn't yet, and I want to. So here's the challenge that I have, is that we have, okay, so here's my plan. I've got a lot of organization-specific stuff in a lot of these modules. So one thing with like getting published is I clean up the stuff that's special about us, but the pattern, the way we use stuff has made that kind of hard. So for example this is the get module that gets information out. This module hard codes a little bit, like the server instances, endpoints. I think I've got like a credential. It's still a read-only credential, but it's still in this module to talk to it, right? So I got to put that someplace. I got a complementary module called LDX set that sets stuff into our source. So we pull from Elastic and we set it into source, like add new product, add new server. Like we got friendly commands for all of that. And I have inside that module like a folder full of like base templates. When I make a new component, I say, is it a database? Is it a website? Is it an API? And it dumps some base information that we want right into our source. Well, it's very specific to the way we use that. So I need to come up with a solution to not only those organization-specific settings, but also like those template type features of something. And honestly, the way I think I'm going to solve it is we had Fred Weissman, gentleman from Germany that manages the PS framework as a mod. It's a module that has a whole bunch of features and pieces in it. He's been actually building it for a long time. It's pretty cool. Has some amazing logging features, but he also has a configuration module in there that lets you manage configuration at like a profile level, a system level, and I think that my ultimate solution is having a internal module. It's called just say LD DevOps or DevOps module. That when he gets loaded, he sets those configuration values into one of those central config stores locations, and then every other module looks for keys based off keys in that same store. Since I could probably use names that match more of the module that says, LDX gets Elastic endpoint, and my DevOps one is actually setting those for everybody else, that's a pattern that another org could use to either, one, set those for that module, and I'd probably have the helper function that says get, set, or change, with the instructions like, hey, having a script or a module that would just set these across your org will save you from having to, in your profiles, set all these things. Or the alternate is you don't put it in the module, and everybody has to edit their profile to say, default parameter value of server name equals this. And I think this magic module leveraging Fred's configuration module is probably my ultimate solution. And I think if I can implement that shift, then it'll make getting this and some of these other pieces open source a lot easier. And I've got one module that does a lot of our JSON processing that I need to rebuild as like a .NET Core compatible. And as I do that effort, I'll probably want to try to do like open source first. So I've been trying to do, it's been easier to do open source net new for us versus taking existing stuff and retrofitting it. Because as you look at it, man, there's so much specific logic. And I've taken some things, but I split them down the middle. I'm like, okay, I take this ugly one, I split them in half. Like, okay, here's the LD stuff, and here's the TFS stuff specifically. And that's where you see the TFVC module was one where we had this ugly interconnected thing that it was time to start over. And I kind of started fresh open source first and was able to keep our business logic somewhere else. And that was up there. And the VSO logging is the same story. Connections. Oh, and then if you're building lots of modules, definitely take a look at Plaster. So Plaster is a tool that's all about having templates that provide values to generate files, right? And you know what? A module is just a collection of files. Having just a really simple module where you're just making the PSD1, the PSM1, like that's a simple script. But mine, I'm getting a lot of scaffolding, lots of pieces in there now. I have an older template out on my repo that, well, it should throw something together that has like the build script and the help generation, some pester tests. So if I run, let's see this guy here, and if I do invoke Plaster on this template, which is I've already cloned off this repo, and I'm specifying in this folder, when I run this, Plaster will ask me all these questions along the way. Name of your module. And it's got some defaults. Yes, I'll take the default. Brief description. This is just a demo. And then the repo name, defaults. Get a username. Actually, that's not quite right. That's just pulling from my system username. Actually, let's look backwards. I need to attach that module. And it's going to create all these files for me. And if I do tree/f, it was 10. So he created these two files for me, a classes folder. Wait a second. Okay, I got the info folder. Here's my get ignore, the STSCI, app voyeur information. This guy I still might be using PS deploy, like all the pieces that I was using at the time. I think this is probably about a year and a half old, but all the pieces I was using for my pipeline. This is like auto-generating and dumping it. VS Code settings, then the actual module, and then I don't know what those demos are, docs, specs, and some basic tests, at least some structure for tests. I'm not going to dive into them much, but just know that Plaster is very popular for generating PowerShell modules. I haven't seen it used for a whole lot else. But no, this is actually I've got this template forked. Actually, this is my template, but Plaster is. Oh, I guess it's from the PowerShell team. I can't remember if it's them or some community. It might have started in the community. I don't recall anymore, actually. Yeah, so generating files, and then okay, so Plaster is good for. So it's nice that it creates all that scaffolding for me, but my biggest problem was then as I was changing these files, I had to go back to my modules and update them. So phase 2, where how I'm managing that drift, is that I created a repository with all my common files. This one's actually public, Loan Depot module common files. And what I do is I add, actually if I run this here, you'll see that my modules have a second remote. So when I do a normal git fetch and push, it goes to the main repository for that module. But I'm doing a trick here where I actually have a module common files where I can do a git pull module common files, git merge as a way to constantly consume changes in. And I'll have to resolve merge conflicts on time to time, but if I'm good about not editing those files in the project, I can always just pull them down from my central repository. It's still too much work. I think my phase 3 will be a combination of this and moving as much of that logic I had in my build scripts into another module. That way when I update that module, everybody gets updated just right away. Right now I still gotta like slowly touch, and I get some drift still where I don't touch all my modules all the time, so I've got way too many of them. In fact, I think I'm up to CD, LD, probably about 43 or so modules, I think, at Loan Depot. Okay, so I think that's all the material that I prepared, and I suppose I kind of did fill the time better than I thought I would. From here, what questions or things you guys want to, do we need to loop back and review any of these things, or are you building modules and having questions, or what types of things are you running into? I think I kind of got an open forum here, we can poke at them. My solution there was to live closer to work. And I say that, but my last place, I was at 45 minutes to an hour 15 away, drove me nuts. So when I relocated here, I paid a little bit more, a lot more. Actually, a lot more from what I was paying in Austin.
I bet, yeah.
But I'm paying a little bit for him to be close, but that quality of life difference of being like 13 minutes versus an hour, I mean, it just quality of life. Like it's just a requirement for me from now on, at least for the next 13 years I retire, that I got to be within 20 minutes of work. Like I thought I could handle that long commute, and I mean I was handling it, but I really wasn't. It's like, so in a way I was able to. I got more energy with my family, but then I got energy to work on this stuff again in the evenings, and kind of got actually my project and fun time is better. So yeah, definitely worth that. Yeah, I listen to podcasts, but it's still draining.
What to put in or how to separate these into modules. I have functions that I'm not sure modules.
So I say,
I get them.
I say be quick to put them in a module, even if you have a module called other, right? Like I need a function for something, let me put it in my dumping ground. And do I have an other?
Yeah, do you have like
ls other? Like I've got an LD other. Like I know where this thing goes. Let me get it in there. And we actually have our LD utility module is getting kind of big. Utility ls measure. We have like 46 functions in this guy that are ls base name. They're kind of like all over the board. Like they just didn't really fit anywhere else. I've got enough Git related stuff now that I'm actually ready to say, you know, I need a Git module. Yes. I do that because I suppose since we're doing like this CI/CD type pipelines, if it aligns with what we do with the dev side, that every one of their CS projects is its own repository in TFS. And so yeah, so we do one module, one repository, and repositories are kind of cheap, so it's good to set them up that way. And we also like that because since we deploy the whole build thing at once, the way it works, like, yeah, our release pipeline does the build and release based off the repository name, so that pattern just fits really well with us. Like, you could probably do one mono repo, but then do like filters to say, when I check into this folder, do this build. But I think for me, mentally, it's just easier to have them all, easier cookie cutter patterns to have them all separate. So that's like modules in general sometimes. So then also like take a thing that before you think would have been that 1,000-line script, maybe he is one module. Like we've had some projects here that were a very specific thing that we just made that as a module to have all its functional pieces together. Like I think we got one that literally just takes people check some SQL scripts into a repository, and then they go to Jira and transition their tickets between statuses. And at certain statuses, we execute those in dev, QA stage, or prod. And with the tooling around that, it's a fairly simple pattern, and the initial ask was fairly small, but it kind of grew a little bit, and we was like, you know, we just made that a module right away and get that all packaged together versus having this one giant script that was doing all that logic. Like, we're going to break it up anyways. And then I suppose my other takeaway would be, as from our, do I have, I like to keep my functions relatively small. Like if I hop out here and just look at, roll the dice here, see how big my functions actually are. But my edge, he's kind of one of my larger ones. He's 200 lines with 125 of it just being the parameters. Right, so as one of my larger ones, I got only 100 lines in the actual code, and he's fairly easy to read at a glance. Entity, this guy's sitting at 128, graph, 150, inline, this guy's tiny, node, rank. So like most of my functions here are like 100 lines, give or take. I think they're kind of long, but I think that's where they grew out to be. 96, set new format script, he's probably tiny, 36. So we've just skimmed the majority of my PS Graph module, and every one of those like 100 lines or so. And so with that, like looking at it, like I've really got like one chunk of code that I really got to troubleshoot and debug once I get past the parameters. It's like I've got 40, 50 lines of parameters. He should be as well. Partly because this guy is in the gallery, I needed a lot of polish on those, more so than I generally need. But like this guy's just one line effectively. So yeah, so if you could do smaller functions, I think they're easier to manage. Look at they all fit in one line. Like the best practice type of thing is keep those things in manageable pieces, and then your logic, like variable names, get more intuitive, I think, because I can actually use a word like item, and I can see every reference to item in the for loop, right? Because it's the only for loop I have. And I feel much better about using a stupid generic term here when my function is this small. But if I had like 2,000 lines and this guy's item here, I definitely try hard not to, like on a loop variable, like reuse them in other spots, because if you screw something up and get it like set to a value you didn't expect, like you're dirty coming in or something. But anyways, yeah, smaller functions, and then so yeah, more modules. Oh, so I suppose before you guys take off, I do have on my website here, PowerShell Explained. I do have a search. I can probably just search for modules, and then so here's the first half of the talk, right? Building a module one microstep at a time. I kind of walk through that. So since you kind of missed some of the beginning stuff, the majority of this material I pulled from posts I've already done. So like the building module one microstep at a time, the standard binary module, that's how I was, I probably copied the commands somewhere here. Yeah, I started with these commands. Like those were the 6 commands I ran to basically build a binary module and then I built scaffolding around it, right? So this talk goes in depth on that. And then I have one microstep at a time. Starts with the smallest step, and I just basically baby step it with some explanation around what each step is doing and why. Then your first internal PS repository is where I was actually publishing to a share path. So we're just doing that register and then publish. Like that's those two commands. That's, like I said, I was so shocked to realize how simple that was. Like the idea eluded me for so long until I saw these two commands and I'm like, oh yeah, that is way simpler than I ever imagined. And then for sure, the CI/CD pipeline, that was the post you were mentioning earlier, where I talk about, at least as of, Jesus, 2 years ago, the whole pipeline, all the pieces I put into a module from where I check it in, what happens to the end. Where I did do one, a really quick one that was basically modifying. Let's do DevOps. That looks like a link to it. So there's a cheap search, like I just dropped some. I could do, okay, so the other way I find stuff on my blog is through the tags. There it is. So I review based off of this, and I think I modify based off that first post. So if this is the baseline, I say, okay, my build PS1, marketing materials, start for free, click on the GUI, click on the GUI. So what I have to do with my pipeline is I put all my logic into a build.ps1. That way, locally, I can build it and run it, or I can go to some other tool and say, just run this PowerShell script. So for me to move my stuff to Azure DevOps was really just figuring out how to get Azure DevOps to run my PSM1 with my API key, and my app Voyager story is the same one. I just got to run this build script with my API key, and it made me agnostic to where I was running these things. There are lots of Azure DevOps things you can drop in that will do stuff for you, but if I can't run it on my local, I can't troubleshoot or debug it as easy. And I like being able to that consistent experience across locally versus on these build agents. And then, so what's nice was we use TFS internally here. Like we had, we're on 2018 now, we had the previous version before, and then this Azure DevOps is just the newer of the same thing. So all these screens look so familiar based off of what we've been doing on-prem. Yeah, so then I suppose I jumped too far away, but I do have tags. I have all these labeled as modules. So this is pretty much that list we're looking at. CI/CD pipeline, some plaster talk, micro steps. I do something clever with semantic versioning automatically using a NuGet server PS repository. I think I should grab a Docker image and run against it in that post. I also do something clever where I mirror community modules to an internal repository to pin our versions across the org at the same lockstep. It's like if I've got like 3 versions of Pester floating around, am I troubleshooting Pester or am I troubleshooting my stuff? So if I know every quarter if I update Pester to the latest, or I know when I update Pester, if I have problems, I can blame it on that update. And I can kind of gate my team from pulling in random versions of stuff kind of through that process. So I literally download it, run my tools, publish it internally, and all of our stuff says look internal first and pull it there if we can. And yeah, so yeah, definitely reference those posts. And those I reference those heavily for the majority of this talk. So, all right, well, I think I've talked for quite a bit for this one. I think I'll shut down this live stream here, and if you have any questions, just let me know. And we will do something next month. I don't know what yet, but I have it on the calendar already, so I don't have to wait till the last minute to get it posted. And I'll probably try to find a different, either remote speaker or somebody else to cover the next session. And I've been talking like I'd like to do a script type club sometime, but yeah. So all right, cool.